Okay. I rather enjoyed these two chapters. I found in all of my looking at my my books and everything that I check out to make out the study, one of the things I found was that there are special features of this oracle that make it one of the most moving and yet hard to understand of Isaiah's prophecies. The inspired poet-prophet presents us with graphic pictures of judgment on Moab, sketching them often in the briefest of phrases. What makes the oracle so memorable and is not the appeal to our so memorable, and I think that's what appeals to our imagination as well as our ears. These verses are filled with anguished wailing of the bereaved and the fugitives, touch the heart of the reader. One is reminded of the justice of judgment, for the godly in every age must take the side of God in his righteous acts of judgment. But the reader is not forbidden to mourn at the consequences of the people's sins. And we're going to find out more about Moab. I have in one of my other books that I ordered to decide what book we were going to use, has a little snippet I'm going to read at the end about Moab. It's just a short piece. I'm going to do these by, each chapter is in 2 sections, and I will read them, and then I'll discuss the verses that I read. I'm going to read 1 through 4 of chapter 15. Ar in Moab is ruined, destroyed in a night. Kir in Moab is ruined, destroyed in a night. Dibon goes up to its temple, to its high places to weep. Moab wails over Nebo and Medeba. Every head is shaved and every beard cut off. In the streets they wear sackcloth on the roofs, and in the public squares they all wail, prostrate with weeping. Heshbon and Elelah cry out. Their voices are heard all the way to Jahaz. Therefore the armed men of Moab cry out, and their hearts are faint. Moab is a very small nation. And this probably isn't the first time you've heard of Moab. If you've done any studies at all in the Old Testament, it is mentioned in the Old Testament a lot. And sometimes you might also have heard of Moab with another place called Ammon. All the places mentioned in these verses were in Moab. So all the towns that I mentioned were actually cities of Moab. The enemies came in silently, and behind them a trail of death and destruction happened. The land was full of weeping people, some gathering at religious shrines to cry to their gods, others in public places to join in community displays of weeping. Remember, Moab is, remember I said that they went to shrines of their gods. They are not Christian, okay? They worshipped idols. Verses 5 through 9. My heart cries out over Moab. Her fugitives flee as far as Zor, as far as Eglath Shelishalah. They go up the way to Luith, weeping as they go on the road to Anaranam. They lament their destruction. The waters of Nimreim are dried up, and the grass is withered. The vegetation is gone, and nothing green is left. So the wealth they have acquired and stored up, they carry away over the ravine of the populars. Their outcry echoes along the border of Moab. Their wailing reaches as far as Eglam. Their lamentation as far as Bir Elim. Dimon waters are full of blood, but I will bring still more upon Dimon, a lion upon the fugitives of Moab, and upon those who remain in the land. I want to go back and kind of, I highlighted things in my Bible that I think will help us understand some about the cities and where they are, because some of them still might exist, some of them not. But Moab is actually a country east of the Dead Sea that was a perpetual enemy of Israel. Ar, the location of this city is unknown. The destruction of Moab was probably connected with the invasion of Sargon of Assyria in 715 to 713 BC. Probably Kir Haresthus, 15 miles south of the Arnon River, and perhaps the capital of Moab at this time. Kir means city, by the way. Dibon, located 4 miles north of the Arnon River and given to the tribe of Gad. At one time, high places. They mentioned high places with the shrines. Shrines originally built on hilltops and usually associated with pagan worship. Nebo, north of the Arnon River, perhaps near Mount Nebo. Medeba, about 6 miles south of Heshbon, and once captured by Israel from Sihon. Heshbon, located about 18 miles east of the northern tip of the Dead Sea. It was King Sihon's capital before Israel captured it. Is Elah, about a mile north of Heshbon and always mentioned with it. Jahaz, just north of the Arnon River and about 20 miles from Heshbon. I should have looked, because I have a book that has maps.
I've got a map that was part of this Bible.
Oh. Yeah, I don't, I'm surprised because generally when they leave a lot, they'll put a map in my Bible, but I didn't have one. But you
We all pretty much have the same Bible. There are a lot of maps in the back.
Oh, I didn't even think to look in the back.
Yeah.
What map is it?
It's actually the map 6 that I'm looking at has a lot of the names.
So we need,
Yeah.
see, this is Sinai, Exodus, land of the 12 tribes. Oh, I have Ammon. Here's Gad. Here's some of it. There's Mount Nebo, and Dibon. Remember, Gad was one of the 12 tribes, and some of that territory had been taken. Well, yeah, because Dibon we're in Reuben's territory. Assyrian and Babylonian. Yeah, I don't have a map specifically for Moab, but the Assyrian the map with the 12 tribes actually gave me more of the towns. But Zor, it is probably located near the southern end of the Dead Sea And Lot fled there from Sodom. And any of the other cities that are mentioned, the last three, are locations unknown. They don't know where.
Salt Sea the same as the Dead Sea.
Yeah, 'cause
Yeah.
it's full of salt, so it's dead.
Yeah.
Because it's amazing, we have the same Bible, but we got different maps.
The maps, the way they're shaded and stuff.
Different, well, they're different, what's the word I want? Editions. They're different, yeah, but they're different editions. And that will tend to sometimes change things. The waters of Nimreim, perhaps to be identified with the Wadi in Numera, 10 miles from the southern end of the Dead Sea. They talked about the waters of Nimreim. Well, good. The map in the back, that's pretty good if it gives you any idea of what's there. Isaiah's words, we're looking at verses 5 through 9 now. Isaiah's words are, due to him being moved by the fate of the Moabites, but to emphasize the severity of the blow which struck Moab. None of these places named in these verses can be identified with certainty except for Zor, which is at the southeast tip of the Dead Sea. It looks like the flight of most of the fugitives was southward to Edom. So if you look on your map, you might see Edom because that was a place that we've heard about. The Moabites were warned that there was no hope, of alleviation. This was their judgment. This was God's judgment on them. It may only have been a night raid, one night, but it was a devastating one and an earnest of further acts of divine judgment. We can't forget all of what we're looking at, all for the next what we've looked at the last few weeks and what we're looking at for the next 4 or 5 are all oracles on God's judgment of these countries that have sinned. And this is God's judgment on them. And he's seeing them being destroyed. The reference to the enemy as a lion reminds us of the reference to Assyria in Amos 3:12, where the ultimate lion of judgment is God himself. We can keep this deadly emotional passage in perspective if we bear in mind the fact that it describes an act of God. Now, I want to go to Jeremiah. I'm going to read, I want you to go there because I'm not really going to read the whole thing because it's a chapter 48. It's way too long. But here in Jeremiah, now we studied Jeremiah. I think most of you were in the class. That's the one I took over for Pastor Chuck. But this is a message about Moab. Jeremiah is giving a message about Moab here too. It's Jeremiah 48. So it's interesting because if you read it, you're going to see that there's a lot of the same things going on in Jeremiah that's going on with Isaiah. And I pointed out to you only because it's very long. It's like 47 verses. So if you want to read it, I think you'll, get a lot out of it. And it's interesting because there's other there's another place that I'm going to actually read later on, and it's in 2 Samuel, and it also relates to Moab. So, chapter 6, both these chapters are short, and that's why I didn't feel guilty in having both of them read. So we're going to look at 16, verses 1 through 5. Send lambs as tribute to the ruler of the land from Selah across the desert to the mount of daughter of Zion. What is daughter of Zion? We've seen it, right, it's Jerusalem. And the statement, send lambs as tribute, as King Mesha sent 100,000 lambs to King Ahab of Israel each year. And we heard about this in 2 Kings when we studied it. So now proud Moab, which has often oppressed Israel, is advised in her crisis to submit to the king in Jerusalem. So he's being advised here by Isaiah to send the lambs, okay? And Selah, the natural fortified capital of the Edomites south of the Dead Sea, is situated on a rocky plateau that towers 1,000 feet above the nearby Petra. That's from the land of Zelah. And continue in verse 2, like fluttering birds pushed from the nest, so are the women of Moab, of the fords of Arnon. Give us counsel, render a decision, make your shadow like night at high noon. Hide the fugitives, do not betray the refugees. Let the Moabite fugitives stay with you. Be their shelter from the destroyer. The oppressor will come to an end, and destruction will cease. The aggressor will vanish from the land. In love a throne will be established. In faithfulness a man will sit on it. One from the house of David, one who in judging seeks justice and speeds the case of righteousness. Now, what I just read, verses 4, it's 4b and 5, are a messianic message. The one from the house of David is the Messiah, and we know the Messiah was Jesus. These verses exposed all to the view of the whole land of Moab with its ruined cities and fleeing homeless people. It concentrates first on the city of Selah, the source of the message of verses 3 through 4a, and then on the fords of Arnon, where the Moabite refugees, subjects of the message, gather. Selah was Edomite until the Moabites took it over and made it the seat of its government. Moab was famous for its great flocks of sheep. The Moabite rulers in desperation sent lambs in recognition of the king of Judah's overlordship to support them. This was an appeal for asylum for their refugees, many of whom would be women with children. Isaiah's description in verse 2 of their frenzied endeavors to reach safety without harm is very graphic. If we go back and look at verse 2, we'll see it says, like fluttering birds pushed from the nest, so are the women of Moab at the fords of Arnon. The shadow in verse 3 pictures Judah as affording protection, like a great rock from the merciless midday sun, but it's also possible that it further develops the analogy of the fluttering young birds. These would be easy prey for a predator on the ground, unless the large shadow of the parent bird fell protectively across them as they moved toward the earth. Verse 4b through 5 are probably the reply from Jerusalem to Celia. It resembles 14:32. If you go back to chapter 14 and check out 32, it says, "What answer shall be given to the envoys of the nation? The Lord has established Zion, and in her his afflicted people will find refuge." Here again, it's a reference. In my Bible it says God will protect Jerusalem from the Assyrians, and we know this because that's a promise, that's a covenant that he made, that Jerusalem would never fall. Okay. 1432, in its triumphant assertion that Jerusalem is a place of security in the purpose of God. These verses have been understood as continuing the message from Moab to Judah and constituting a virtual promise in the part of Moab that she would accept overlordship of the house of David. In other words, they're willing to be more or less under their control. If you protect us, if you take in our refugees, we will accept being under your control, and that's what they're promising them. If the words are addressed from Judah to Moab, even if Isaiah is talking to Judah, these are words that are understood along messianic lines. The love and faithfulness referred to are in the heart of God and come to his people on the basis of his promise. In 2 Samuel chapter 7, verses 12 through 16. And I will read that. It says, "The Lord declares to you that the Lord himself will establish a house for you. When your days are over and you rest with your fathers, I will raise up your offspring to succeed you, who will come from your own body. I will establish..." I just lost my place. "I will raise up and I will establish his kingdom, and he is one who will build a house for my name," and that the house means temple. "And I will establish the throne of his kingdom forever. I will be his father, and he will be my son." He's talking about Jesus. "When he does wrong, I will punish him with the rod of men, with flogging inflicted by men. But my love will never be taken away from him, as I look away from Saul, whom I removed from before you. Your house and your kingdom will endure forever before me. Your throne will be established forever." And this is Nathan speaking, the prophet Nathan. And he's he reported to David. What we've read in chapter 16, just read the messianic message, is going back even further to David, to Nathan telling David that he would create a house for him. And the prophet presents the messianic rule as extending over both Midian and Moab. I thought I had another note. Oh, when they talk about the house of David, think of it as the dynasty, okay? It's not, it means all of David and all his, people that come after him. Okay, verses 8 through 12. This is interesting here. This whole, oh no, I can't, I needed to go 6 and 7 first. Sorry about that. These are two short verses, and basically what they're telling you is the sins of Moab. He's reiterating, okay, this is what's wrong, this is what you've done wrong. We have heard of Moab's pride, her overweening pride and conceit, her pride and her insolence, but her boasts are empty. Therefore the Moabites wail. They wail together for Moab, lament and grieve for men of Ker Hareseth. Basically, a true prophet is expected to go beyond, the misery that results from God's judgment and to the offenses against him. And that caused it, and this is exactly what Isaiah has done. He has now, he's taken the time to let everybody know these are their offenses. And this is why they've been judged by God. Verses 8 through 12. This is a lament, okay? The fields of Heshbon wither, the vines of Sibmah also. The rulers of the nations have trampled down the choicest vines, which once reached Jazer and spread toward the desert. Their shoots spread out and went as far as the sea. So I weep. My question to you is who is weeping? Is it Isaiah or is it God? Okay. As Jazer weeps for the vines of Sibmah, O Heshbon, O Elah, I drench you with tears. The shouts of joy over your ripened fruit and over your harvest have been stilled. Joy and gladness are taken away from the orchards. No one sings or shouts in the vineyards. No one treads out wine at the presses, for I have put an end to the shouting. My heart laments for Moab like a harp, my inmost being for Ker Hareseth. When Moab appears at her high place, she only wears herself out. When she goes to her shrine to pray, it is to no avail. So Isaiah is very good at visualizing Moab as a large vineyard and the vines reaching to its furthest corners, but trampled under by the enemy's feet. In an agricultural community, harvest is a season of great joy. But see, no one's singing now. No one's shouting. And however, in Moab, the vineyards would be silent. No ripened fruit would see a winepress because judgment through foreign rulers stalked the land. In verse 11, Isaiah's heart was deeply moved by the deserved suffering of the Moabites. Verses 13 through 14. This is the word the Lord has already spoken concerning Moab. But now the Lord says, within 3 years as a servant bound by contract, would count them. Moab's splendor and all her many people will be despised, and her survivors will be very few and feeble. There has been earlier prophecies against Moab with the same information as given here by Isaiah. It's also possible these verses were given by Isaiah at a later time. What is sure is that Isaiah had a very specific disclosure from God as the time of Moab's judgment. The similarities here with chapter 21, verses 16 through 17, it is felt the prophecy relates to the campaign of Sargon against the tribal peoples of northeast Arabia. For the Assyrian army's route would most naturally have taken them through Moab. Moab was kind of in the route for a lot of countries to go through them to get somewhere else. And so they, I guess, historians have decided that that's why it was only one night, remember? It took one night for the destruction. So while the army was going through there to go where they were going, destruction was they destroyed whatever they saw. So, does anybody have any questions? It's kind of I found this one more interesting, I think, than any of the ones we've gone over so far. It is a country that we've heard of before, and it certainly is. There are other prophecies. Well, I've pointed you to Jeremiah 48, where that's a prophecy too of what's going to happen with Moab. And Isaiah is very poetic, and he's very descriptive, and he doesn't take a lot of words to describe what he wants you to see, to use your imagination. And so it's, I liked it. Did you guys like this lesson? I thought it was interesting. It was a little different. Next week we'll be looking at Damascus, but we have the questions. There's let me get my papers together here. Since I don't have pages in the book that I can write my notes on, I have to put them on pieces of paper. And I know it's because there's no place. I'm used to having all those pages to do it in. We'll look at the questions, and then I'll read you this one excerpt from this other book. Question number 12. It says, Sargon's army ravaged Moab in 715 to 713 BC. This oracle depicts the flight of the refugees after Moab's strongholds have been taken. Question 12. The Lord judged Moab's pride by destruction. Still, how did he feel about the suffering people? And they give you two places to look. So how do you think God felt?
Well, I had down in verse 15, chapter 15, verse 5. He was crying out for them. He was weeping. He was very sad for them.
The sadness, he wept.
Rest.
What did you get out of 16, 9, and 11?
God's heart laments from Moab, and that's a severe grief sorrow. That's what lament.
Yeah. Well, yeah. And the second, this chapter 16, he was more or less weeping over what? Remember, the land was described as a vineyard.
But the land was destroyed.
Right. And harvest time was known as a time of joy, right? So he's weeping because that's not going to happen. The vineyard is going to be silent. Okay. 13. The Lord counseled the stricken Moabites to send tribute to Jerusalem as a sign of humbling themselves as subjects. How can Jerusalem be a hope for Moab?
Well, the city would be a place for the refugees to hide and be protected from the Assyrians. And
Yeah, because of why? Why is Jerusalem going to be probably the best place to hide in?
God protected that city.
Yeah, right. And what else is Jerusalem going to be known for?
What else is one?
What else are we going to, what else is Jerusalem going to be known for? Or what do we associate with Jerusalem?
Jesus crucifixion.
Yeah, but the Messiah, right? Yeah, and now the Messiah is not going to be there when Moab is. I mean, when the Moabites, but there probably are some of them there when he comes. You know, they don't leave. They're going there as more or less as well as it says, subjects. They're going to be ordered around, slaves. Yeah, so they're going to be there. They could very well be some Moabites, not the ones that are going there now, but you know, because this is 7:13, and you know, but yes. Okay, 14. Consider how Jerusalem is supposed to treat the refugees. 16 verses 1 through 5. Are there any implications here for the way the church treats unbelievers who seek mercy? If so, what are they?
I said, show compassion.
Okay.
And teach them that our hope lies in God.
Okay.
I would be compassionate and loving and model Jesus.
Okay. When I looked at verses 1 through 5, this is what I came up with, okay? Hide the refugees and do not betray them. Allow them to stay there and be their shelter, not the destroyer. Now, I feel, okay, the church counsels unbelievers and helps them through compassion. For instance, the food closet, the food truck. Now, I know you guys are out on the food truck all the time. And do you think that everybody that comes to the food truck is a believer?
I don't go out on it.
Oh.
I
Well,
didn't go out Christmas because I was sick, but other than that, I'm
But,
I was told not to judge people when they come to the truck, but I'm not so sure that all of them are.
right. I would, well, and even the food closet. I've worked just a few times in the food closet, helping more or less pack bags and all that, especially when they were in Fellowship Hall. I worked in it more then since I'd been out in the building. And those people are hungry. They need that bag of food you're going to hand them. And, but I think we would be very naive to think that everybody that walked through that door was a Christian or believed as we believe. But they needed help. And so that's what we're there for, is to help.
'cause
not to
Christ-
judge them,
Right.
but to help them.
And I don't see any of them because I don't run the bags out to the car because they don't come in. So,
Yeah.
but, you know, I hear some conversations, but I think that by the guidelines, because there was the Maryland food bank, there can be no counseling here when they're being given food from the state, basically.
Yeah.
So I think that's why they do the food truck, because that's all
Contributions from
our food
us.
that we can
Yeah.
counsel
Right.
people out there,
Yeah.
approach them and ask them, do they want a prayer or anything? You can't do any of that here.
Most of the people that I've come across are very thankful, and they bless you and bless them. So the majority of them are good people.
Mm-hmm.
But you're right, Gene. To be naive, to think that they're all believers, no, I don't think they all are.
But that doesn't take away from them that they have a need,
Right.
and we can fill it.
And if we fill the need, then you hope that they see the.
Well, and we have people, remember that young couple that we used to see in church? I don't know what's happened with them,
That we're home.
because Ben had a very close relationship with them, but they were from that. That's how they got to know us.
And I gave out, I was over at the food thing, giving out, when we were giving stuff for the children for school, starting school and all that. And there were many, many children over at the church, right on Trumbull Road.
Yeah.
And I don't know why, but a lot of the little kids sort of gravitated to me and they were talking and, well, where did you get this and how'd you get that and thank you very much. And the parents were encouraging them to thank for the
Mhm.
stuff that they were getting for school.
Yeah.
There's been a couple of wild numbers that have come in there too.
A couple, what did you say?
Wild.
A couple of wild numbers.
Right.
One woman yelled out, "What do you got today?" Out of the window, and I'm like, but there's one man that showed up twice, I think, who was really nice. He came over, he says, "Oh," he said, "I thought you were selling something." We said, "No, you're welcome." And he gave donations.
Wow.
So that was nice, you know,
Mhm.
see that often.
No, was that at the food truck?
And
Because you don't have to be in need, I mean, you don't have to demonstrate.
Mm-mm.
your need.
Right.
If there's
Not for the
anybody-
food
there's
truck.
Demonstration, anybody can come. and
I
do
could
that.
take a bag home if I'm
Mhm.
Well, that's true. Down here you have to.
yeah.
But yeah, at the food truck you don't. But I would venture to say that people that really don't need it probably aren't going to lower themselves to go to the food truck. If you know what I'm saying, I mean, you're humbling yourself to do that. And not everybody is willing to do that. If you're hungry, you're going to.
some drive up in a new Mercedes.
Oh my. Well, that's not.
You look at him and you think, and Betty straightened me out. I said,
Uh-huh.
"Can you believe this?" And she said, "Maybe they lost their job," which is true.
Well, that's what Mary Kay had said one time, because, you know.
Well, that's true.
these things.
Yep. Yeah, because, I mean, maybe both, you know, if they're married, both of them lost their jobs because, you know, with the everything that's been going on, and they might be driving a Mercedes, but how long will they be driving it?
Right. And as she said, you know, they've got their money only goes so far, and so if
That's
it has
it.
to go to the car payment, so you've got transportation,
Yeah,
and you still need the food.
yep.
And a few people double up. I mean, they'll come in a car together, two different families.
Mm-hmm. That's, yeah, yeah. Yeah, I remember, well, like I said, when it was here in Fellowship Hall, I filled bags. I wasn't one to meet with the people where, you know, I was there to fill the bags. But you see things. I mean, you see the people and you know, and that's when they they used to have a basket of books, you know, and the little kids would come in and they'd be so, you know, they'd get a book. They didn't think they could keep it, but we said, well, if you like it, you can take it. Do they do that down in the food closet? Well, no. That's a shame because that was very well received, you
They're not
know.
allowed to come in.
Oh,
They can get out of their car.
They've given them out.
is that because of the pandemic now? Yeah.
So somebody goes out and takes their information through the car window,
Yeah.
and then the runner takes the stuff out and loads the car for them. Now, sometimes they do get out and help, but they don't necessarily
Yeah.
help you even load it.
What it does for you at the end of that day is realize how lucky you are
Yeah.
when you see people like that.
Yep.
And that you should appreciate more what you have.
That's true. That is so true. Yep. Well, I'm going to read this one little thingy.
A variety of emotions depending on how they arrive, how they're dressed, and what, you know,
Mm-hmm.
whether they're just taking things when it's out at the church type thing. So over the years, Ben and I used to do some of that type of stuff too. I've seen a big variety of, and so I just say to myself, don't judge. Let
Yeah.
it be.
Well, I remember the last coat drive we did.
Yes.
Basically, it was done to take it over to the community where we do sidewalk Sunday school. I mean, they did give coats to other, you know, places, but the majority of it went over there. And I'll never forget this because we also did the hat and glove, you know, tree. And so I was over there. I had like 2 long tables like these filled with hats and gloves and all of that. And Stephanie, I don't know how many tables they had filled with coats and jackets. And I mean, it was amazing, actually. And these people, they knew, they were told that we would be there between like 10 and 12, something like that. Well, these people would come in and watching people, because my table was kind of like in the back, you know, and the little kids would come up and pick out their gloves and, you know, and their hats and everything. And but to watch some of the people come in, I'm a people watcher anyway, so just to watch them, it was amazing to me the difference in how people would approach. At the very end, it was like maybe 5 of 12. And this woman comes rushing in, and she says, am I too late? Am I too late? And we said, no, you're not too late. But we got rid of every coat but one. But there were still some coats when she got there. She wanted a coat for her little boy. Believe it or not, there was one coat there that would fit her son. And she was so thankful. I thought she was going to cry. She was so thankful. Then we had another lady that was still looking around, and she took one of the other. We left with just one coat. I had given every hat, gloves, everything away. And but this one little old lady, I had gotten a call early that week that there was this old lady that did not have a winter coat. Could we give her a winter coat? I said, well, of course we can. So what kind of coat do you want for her? What size is she? You know, and that kind of thing. So Stephanie and I went out to the trailer, and we rummaged around, and we found a coat we felt was appropriate for a woman her age and everything. And I took it over the next day to the community center, and they called her, and you know, she came over and got it. Now, I didn't meet her then, but the day that we were there with the coats, she came in, and of course, Tracy was there with us also from the community center, and she walked and talked to Tracy. Next thing I know, Tracy's bringing this little old lady back to me, and she said, this is Mary Lou, she's the lady who brought your coat over. And I said, and she hugged me, and said she had just been wearing, and that was a winter that was very cold. I mean, and for her, all she had was a heavy sweater. She had that coat on, and it was like, you know, when you see things like that, it makes it all worthwhile, what you do, you know. And she was so appreciative. And that woman that came in, and I thought, oh, she is going to be so disappointed. We're not going to have a coat for that little boy. There it was, one coat. So you never know. I think it's, you know, it's good to be part of things like that. I think it brings into perspective for you, right? It puts a lot into perspective for yourself.
Another good example is a lot of Dennis Quays went to the veterans. I took them over to the veterans.
Yeah.
And I was absolutely blown away by how many veterans don't have anything. And we're talking anything from underwear,
Oh, yeah.
shirts, regular shirts, coats, all that. And so then once it snowed, I was down in the cupboard. And I found all these boots and stuff that he had. And I thought, okay, I gotta get them packed up and get them over there.
Where do you take them?
Well, you can drop them off and they go to the veterans if you drop it at the police station.
Oh,
Or you can go to the American Legion Hall right on Edgewood Road, and they have certain days that they can come in, the veterans. But I was, of course, dealing with mostly men's clothing and so forth, but they were telling me later that if I had any women's clothing and anything, and I give something here too.
yeah.
That there's a lot of female veterans that don't have stuff. And I'm just surprised that the veterans are really as needy as they are.
Well, there's so many of them that come back
And
and are, you know, I mean, mortally wounded and injured, and they end up homeless. And it's a sad situation.
it's very sad to see the ones with crutches and
Yep.
chairs and so forth.
Yep. Yep. Okay. It says Isaiah's next prophecies concern God's judgment on Moab and the forthcoming devastation of their cities of Ar and Kir. For centuries, the Moabites had been enemies of the Jewish people, and the heart of Isaiah is grieved with the sorrow that will come out of Moab. The notes for Isaiah 15:1 call to our attention. Moab, seed of the father, was a descendant of Lot, conceived out of the incest with his daughter. And that story is in Genesis 19:31-37, if you're interested. The Moabites settled in a region east of the Dead Sea. This chapter shows the heart of the prophet Isaiah as he is painfully grieved over the sorrows coming to Moab. Ruth, remember Ruth, a Moabite, had a role in forming the house of David, for she was his great-grandmother.
You're reading from another book.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is another, it was another book, study Bible book on Isaiah, but I didn't like it the way it was set up. But you know, to know that this all came about because Moab became from Lot, and which is interesting.